Welcome to Native Calgarian and Mossy for listening. I'm your host, Michelle Robinson, speaking to you in Mohkinstsis in the Blackfoot Confederacy, home of the Niitsitapi, Tsuut'ina Dene, and the Yiharhi Nakota. I talk about history, current news, unheard news, book clubs, with special guests to give local or national issues a voice through an urban Satu Dene lens. My life's work will be to honor the voices of my ancestors and next generation with humor, love, and truth. Reconciliation is work, not performance. May we honor all Indigenous voices with that courage. Today is July 27th, 2025. Welcome to Native Calgarian. If you enjoy hearing Indigenous content by this Satu Dene woman, my Patreon account is Native Calgarian, where you can pledge and support. Thank you, previous donors, for showing your support. For those who cannot afford to give, I would love to hear from you at nativeyyc@gmail.com. Send in your comments, your questions. Also, giving a review helps whatever medium you're listening from. I have a YouTube channel where you can go and subscribe. Go to nativecalgarian.com for the latest podcasts and pin posts on social media. And always remember to share what you've learned to your network. Okay. Naganago me koche chestokom aki. Nara dago de kots nagotene siku saradi. My name is Red Thunder Woman. My married English name is Michelle Robinson. I use they, them pronouns. My Dene lineage roots me in the land of the Great Bear Lake tribe in Treaty 11 in Delaney. I'm native to Turtle Island, and my Dene nation is uninvited to this area of Clinchotine Indahe in Satu Dene, meaning Many Big Dog Town, named after the Calgary Stampede. I was born in Calgary, or in Blackfoot, Mohkinstsis, as Michelle Elliott, an English name that has afforded me privilege in an English colonial world. Acknowledging proximity to whiteness is important because the darker the skin, the closer to whiteness, the more you experience racism, the further away, and have wonderful colonial trauma. My late great grandmother or grandfather is Milo Bewell from Delaney. His daughter Alice is my now late granny. My mother and I are Northern Slavey Dene or Satu Dene, but my Indian Act imposed status card by the Canadian government says Yellowknives Dene. Through my father, I am a daughter of the Mayflower and a daughter of the American Revolution. Having a Canadian Indian Act imposed status card is a colonial construct by Canadian policies meant to divide Indigenous peoples' inherent rights. Indigenous Two-Spirit and the 2S LGBTQ community and Indigenous women are at the bottom of the Canadian socioeconomic ladder because of colonial trauma, imposed poverty, racism, gendered violence, and land theft. I'm not a social worker, nor an elder, nor do I speak on behalf of all Indigenous peoples. I share my journey as a ADHD Dene mom navigating this ableist, colonial, misogynistic, racist world in 2025. I think of all of this today, and I hope we honor the many Indigenous lives lost for this so-called country named Canada. I hope anyone listening sees their role in the importance of stopping harm, and as a citizen, see your role in reconciliation as a treaty partner. Land Back is a movement that could save the planet from climate change created by colonialism, but it would be a part of a treaty partnership, part of meaningful reconciliation, and honoring global initiatives like the United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People. As a former geomatics drafter, I'd be happy to teach you more. You'd have to go to nativecalgarian.com for that time. So today I have a person that is really excited to talk about nuclear issues with us, and I'm excited to talk to him about it. Would you like to introduce yourself in your way, Pat?
Yeah, I'm Pat McNamara. I'm originally from Port Hope, Ontario, and I became involved in nuclear issues in 2003 when I found out that the elementary school my daughters were attending was built on radioactive waste. I also found out that the federal government and the nuclear regulator knew about the problem since 1978 and had covered up the findings and allowed kids to be kept in the school for the next 26 years. It wasn't a trivial amount. The radon readings were 506 picocuries per liter, which is 126 times higher than the allowable level. So I don't have much good to say about the nuclear industry or the people running it.
Well, that makes me happy that you're here today because, I'm on a nuclear waste watch email chain and I try to stay on top of whatever's happening. Usually it's out in Ontario, but now it's starting to pop up more in Alberta. And so I'd love to talk to you more about what's going to be happening here in Alberta and your long history of understanding how to stop these things with basically procedures.
Yeah, the best way to start off is just to give a short nuclear history of Canada and how we got to this stage in the first place. The uranium was originally discovered in Canada at Port Radium in the Northwest Territories on Satu. And that was in 1929. It was discovered by Gilbert Labine. And they weren't after uranium, they were after the radium that was contained inside the uranium ore. And there's only very small amounts of radium. When they did the first test batches, it took them 500 tons of uranium ore to get the first gram of radium. You have to remember that radium at the time was the most expensive item on Earth. It was worth $75,000 a gram. But Labine, the prospector, didn't know how to get the radium out of the ore, so he contacted the Canadian government, and it was scientists from the Department of Mines in Canada that came up with the technique to remove it. The mine scientists warned the Canadian government after they finished coming up with the technique of the dangers of radium and the dangers of uranium itself. The mine at Port Radium was started putting out material in 1931, and it was all white miners from all over Western Canada that worked in the mines. But the ore was hauled from the mines all the way to Fort McMurray, and that all that hauling was done by First Nation men from Delaney. And the trip was quite long. They had to load burlap bags of yellow cake, which is a very fine powder, about the same as flour. And they had to load that on the barges at Port Radium with the uranium leaking out of the bags all the time. They loaded the barges, then slept on the barges all the way to Fort McMurray. They had to offload twice for rapids on their way down there and reload everything. And then from Fort McMurray, it was taken by train to my hometown of Port Hope, Ontario. They had taken over an old seed factory in Port Hope to start processing the ore. When they got to Port Hope, there was only, as I said, small amounts of radium taken out of the ore. The rest of the material was dumped in the harbor, in ravines, given away to put under buildings, under roadways. And this went on for 9 years. And by that time, they started discovering the dangers of radium. At the time, they were using it in cosmetics, creams, toothpastes, energy drinks. But the most common use for it at the time was painting the faces on watches and instrumentation for aircraft because it could be seen in the dark. And the way it was done was they were called the dial painters, and it was women in New York that were doing all the work. And to get a fine point on the brushes, they would dip it in the radium and then twirl it in their lips to get a fine point on it
Oh
and then
no.
paint the dials. And it went on for a couple of years before the women's jaws literally started disintegrating. And then some of the people that were drinking the energy drinks, there was one famous athlete who they figured consumed over 1,000 bottles of energy drinks in a 3-year period. And literally his entire skull disintegrated. And that was when the radium industry collapsed. So they shut down the mine and the Port Hope facility in 1939, and they stayed that way until 1942, when shortly after they split the atom for the first time because they needed uranium to build the first bomb. So the mine itself was flooded, so it took them a year to get that going again. In the meantime, they went through my hometown and re-excavated all the waste uranium ore that they dumped everywhere. And that first cleanup of Port Hope was essentially the material that was used in the first nuclear bomb at Hiroshima. So I tormented the authorities over that, it was nice that they did a cleanup, but they killed 140,000 people with the material that they cleaned up with. So the Canadian government took over the mine and the facility in 1942. They nationalized it, and they put a cone of silence over everything nuclear. Canada was one of the three main countries involved in developing the first nuclear bomb through the Manhattan process. The United States and England were the other two. And Canada's main role was supplying uranium and processing it in Port Hope. This went on throughout the war. And then after the war, the Americans headed more towards nuclear weapons. Canada kept supplying uranium, but they also started supplying plutonium through the initial reactors that they built. The initial reactors weren't called reactors, they were called piles, and it was basically just piles of uranium that would go fissile and generate some plutonium in them. And in 1946, right after the war, the Canadian government came up with the Nuclear Control Act. And then they came up with the Atomic Energy Control Board to look after everything nuclear in the country. That was in 1946. The Atomic Energy Control Board was renamed in 1997 as the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, or the CNSC. And I'll just refer to the regulator as the CNSC, just so that you don't get confusion between the two names.
Sure.
So they had control of everything from 1946 onwards. So any contamination, any problem with nuclear was directly under the watchful eye of the nuclear regulators in this country. No one in the country knew anything about the dangers of uranium. They didn't hear about anything until 1974, when the miners from 12 uranium mines at Elliott Lake went on a wildcat strike to protest the high levels of lung cancer and silicosis in the miners that was being caused by high dust concentrations underground and by being forced to undergo McIntyre powder therapy before every shift. McIntyre powder was something that the Canadian nuclear regulators allowed the mine owners to use in the hope of preventing silicosis. And what it was that before the start of the shift, the miners were all put in a room and sealed, and they blew fine particulate uranium dust all through the air and forced the miners to breathe in aluminum dust in the air, and that was supposed to prevent silicosis. It turned out it ended up causing different diseases. So when the strike went on for 14 days, and the nuclear regulator never went in, but the Ontario government sent Dr. James Ham in, and that was in 1975 that Ham went in. And the first thing he said was that the Canadian government had known about the dangers of uranium for 45 years, and no miner had ever been told about it, not once in 45 years. He also reversed 100 workers' compensation claims for lung cancer and came up with 117 recommendations that formed the basis of the occupational health and safety codes that we have in Canada now. So everything that we have in Canada with health and safety was based on him going into the mines.
Wow.
That was the very first time that the public knew of any danger whatsoever from uranium. The second thing that the Canadian government found out was the following year, when St. Mary's School in Port Hope was found to have elevated levels of radon underneath and was determined to have been built on radioactive waste. They had to close down the school, remediate it for 2 years, and open it again. That was the first time that there was mass awareness in the country. And subsequently, they're in the midst of a cleanup now. This is 50 years later. There's up to 5,700 contaminated properties in Port Hope. They started doing a cleanup in 1977. They hauled away 200,000 cubic meters of waste to Chalk River. Once it was filled up, they left Port Hope and never came back again until 2001. They just disappeared for 23 years. And 2001, they came back and said they were going to give us a pristine community and that they'd have to remove 3.5 million cubic meters of waste. To put that in perspective for people, that's a quarter section of land, 160 acres, piled 18 feet deep. That's how
Holy,
much radioactive waste was in my hometown.
holy.
So 3 years after that, they decided to change the cleanup criteria so that they only had to clean up 2.5 million cubic meters. 3 years after that, they reduced it to 1.75 million cubic meters, then down to 1.25 million cubic meters. And now they've got plans in place to reduce it again so that they're only putting 1 million cubic meters in place. So the original 3.25 million or 3.5 million that was supposed to be cleaned up, they're only cleaning up 1 million cubic meters. So we won't be getting a pristine town back. It's the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, our nuclear regulator, that's been in charge of all of this right from the get-go.
Mm-hmm.
They were in charge of all the contaminated mines. Elliott Lake, there was 12 mines that killed 10 lakes and the Serpent River. They were using them just for tailings ponds.
Mm-hmm.
There was 4 mines in Bancroft that did the same thing. There were 26 mines up in Uranium City that basically were all closed at one time. The mine in Port Radium as well. All of these sites were contaminated, and Canadian taxpayers had to pay the cost of cleaning every one of these up. And the only reason that we had to was because the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission just failed miserably at their job. They're in place to protect the industry, not to protect the community. A couple of examples of that, they don't work like a conventional regulator. Uh, we discovered in 2003 in Port Hope that our fire department couldn't fight radiological fires, and we had Cameco that was converting uranium. We also had Zircotech that was making the fuel rods. So we had 2 nuclear fuel cycle companies in town, and we couldn't fight radiological fires. So the fire chief contacted the CNSC and the companies involved. The CNSC suggested that Cameco put procedures, equipment, and staffing in place to be able to fight radiological fires. 6 months later, nothing had been done, so the town council called Cameco in for answers, and the Cameco rep came in and said, "We disagree with the CNSC. We don't feel that the suggestions they made will make it any safer for people of Port Hope, so we've decided not to do it." And that's the way it was being left until community residents got up in arms and forced the issue, and Cameco ended up doing a very good firefighting system afterwards. So the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission cannot order a nuclear company to do anything. They can make suggestions and then they negotiate. We came across a second example of that in 2009 when Bruce Power found that some of the contractors and employees during the refurbishment had been exposed to alpha radiation. They informed the CNSC on January 5th that 19 people had been exposed. When they got to the hearing a month later, they had to admit that 583 workers had been exposed to alpha radiation. The Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission wanted them to test all of the workers for internal radiation. Bruce Power refused to do so, stating that it would be too difficult and time consuming. They countered by offering to test 38 workers to see if further testing was warranted. One of the things that came up at the time was that in Canada, there's only one facility that can test people for internal emitters, and they're only able to process 10 people a week. So for those 583 people, it would have taken 14 months in Canada to test them. When they refused to do it, Bruce Power's spokesman, John Peters, said, "Our response to the CNSC is open to negotiations. Federal inspectors can offer suggestions, but they are not allowed to give binding orders to a nuclear company." None. So it's not like a conventional regulator. If they say, you're only allowed to have 3 parts of this in there, you have to conform to that. With the CNSC, everything is open to negotiation.
And I
One
thought
more.
the Alberta regulator was bad. Holy.
Oh no, they're nothing compared to these guys.
Terrible.
There's one more part to the regulatory structure, and it's the way that they set allowable levels for radiation. It's called the ALARA principle, and it's right on their website. You can check it out. It's ALARA, as low as reasonably achievable. And it's, I'm not kidding. I thought they were kidding the first time I heard it, but they're not. And it's the nuclear company that is the one that makes the decision as to what is reasonably achievable. So it's not, we're going to set this level so that it's safe for people. We're going to set this level so that it's a reasonable amount of money that's going to be spent to do it. So that's the regulatory structure. Now, what's a common practice for them? One example was the alpha radiation or gamma radiation at the fence line of Cameco's facility in Port Hope was exceeding the regulatory level. And instead of getting them to fix it, the CNSC just jumped the regulatory level 500%. And that's a common thing that they do. When they first got involved, when Port Hope showed that it was contaminated, they struck what was called the Federal Provincial Task Force on Radioactivity. And many of the properties in Port Hope were testing between 3 and 4 picocuries per liter, which means that at that rate, at that level, they have to investigate and do remediation. So, in order to avoid having to do that, the federal task force just changed the allowable levels from 3 picocuries per liter to 4 picocuries per liter so that they didn't have to clean up all those sites. So that's what the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission has done. And it's been that since 1946. So every site that's contaminated in the country, they were in charge of everything, every single one of those things. So, do you have any questions or clarifications or?
Oh my God. No, well, first of all, I have to Google everything because I don't know what we're talking about at all. And the last thing I want to do is waste your time explaining it to us, frankly, because people who and I mean at the end of the day I just know that people are dying and it's not okay to have waste that's going to be wasting for tens of thousands of years, not just for the human population but for our water sources, for the earth in general. This is ridiculous. I can't believe this, but I know what you're telling us is the truth. It's just
Yeah.
so frustrating that somebody else's profit matters more than the earth, the water, the lives of us. I will never understand the Canadian government and the things that they do, other than it is very clear all they care about is money.
There's a couple of other points before I carry on. One is they really don't know what they're doing at times.
Mm,
The one instance is it's called the WIPP site, WIPP, down in New Mexico, and they have it's a waste storage facility that the Americans put together down there. And about 2 years after it opened, this is just 20 years ago. 2 years after it opened, they were detecting plutonium on the surface, and this is supposed to be 1,800 feet underground. And what had happened was all of the waste was in barrels, like down underground, and two of the barrels had exploded. And the reason they exploded was that around the radioactive waste to fill the cavities, they'd used kitty litter. And it was good in most of it, but in the two that exploded, they'd used organic kitty litter instead of regular kitty litter, and that's what caused the explosions.
wow.
So they didn't know that something that simple could have such a profound effect on things.
Yeah.
One other instance of that, it was called the Wigner effect, and I won't get into anything technical on it, but in the core of a reactor, the neutron radiation was building up to the point that it was heating up the core of the reactor more than what it was designed to run at. And that's what caused the Windscale fire in Sellafield in England in 1957. That was one of the first major reactor fires.
Hmm.
So we have an industry that really doesn't know what they're doing at all times, being looked after by a regulator that is looking after the industry and not the health of people. and we're the ones that are paying the price for it. And we've
100%.
had to self-educate on all of this. Like none of it was available when I started off 23 years ago. A lot of the information was originally obtained through the American government because they released their secrets after 25 years, whereas in Canada, everything stays hidden in that. So we're able to find out the basics from the American government and then specifically ask for material in Canada. And that's how we got started in it.
Wow, incredible.
It's
Is there a chance, because of our NATO or NORAD involvement, that there is any chance that we can find out more from the States about Canada than really we can find within Canada?
not at this point in time. Like we
Mm,
managed to open a lot of it up now. There's not that much that they have for secrets that we're that concerned about anymore. Um, kind of that time's past. The biggest difference, and like until 2003, there were people that were fighting the nuclear industry that were trying to stop things, but none of them actually understood the nuclear technology.
sure.
And they were, gentle people for the most part,
Mm,
and they never had a success. It just never happened. And when we started in 2003, we had a different mindset about it. And I didn't have much choice but to learn nuclear technology because otherwise we don't know when we're being lied to.
yeah.
And the way that it came about was they wanted to put a process into Port Hope called slightly enriched uranium, which sounds quite benign in that. And it took us a few months to figure out what they were doing. And Cameco had bought 5 million pounds of excess plutonium and uranium from the Russian weapons program. And they were planning on downblending that in our community with natural uranium to make uh, low enriched uranium for use in reactors in the States. And they never said anything about that. They were just going to mix, elevated levels of uranium with natural uranium to make it. And they dumped a 900-page environmental assessment on us, gave us 45 days to comment on it, and we were literally just looking at each other because nobody knew anything about it. So I drew the short straw and had a couple of people helping me, and in 45 days, we came up with 623 questions. Because you have to remember, I'm a carpenter by trade, so there's no point in me giving my opinion. But with the 623 questions, we hung an anchor around their neck that they were never able to get rid of
Nice.
because we dumped it on the local council and they were completely unable to deal with it. So they had to bring a peer review in. And then we dumped it on Cameco and the CNSC. And they answered about 400 of the 623 questions and increased the environmental assessment from 900 to 1,350 pages, which gave us 200 more questions to submit to them. They answered half of them and then increased the environmental assessment study report to 2,000 pages on it. So we ended up shutting down the project. And it was actually kind of funny when some of our group went to Vancouver to accept an award from Canadian Geographic for environmental issues. And they go, yeah, this group resorted to the Socratic method to beat the company. And everybody's looking at each other. What's the Socratic method? It's like, but it was asking questions,
Yep.
you know,
Excellent.
so
You know what? And I'm really grateful you framed it in that way because, you talked about being a carpenter, like a layperson asking these questions, stopping them by asking them questions. Because so many people ask me on a regular, well, does activism even work? Does it matter? And it's like, of course it matters. It doesn't matter if you're sharing info on a Facebook post or if you're writing a letter to your MP. But in this case, you're talking about writing a letter within the bureaucracy that they have created. And I think that that's such a great win. I'm glad you got awarded for that. That's awesome.
it's a twofold thing. Like if they answer the questions, it puts them in a bad spot. If they don't answer the questions, it gives us even more ammunition. Why aren't you answering the questions?
Yeah,
You have to remember that we've developed techniques over the last 23 years that we've piled on top of what that first group that spent 30 years at it learned.
sure.
And we've picked up different skills. We had access to a lot of people that helped us out. I had access to like a large number of scientists in the States that couldn't come forward and say things on their own, but they were saying things through me.
Hmm.
The first 2.5 years I worked at this, I worked in a lawyer's home office beside him. I was in there 16 hours a day.
Wow.
So I had lawyers driving stuff into my head on how to prepare documents, on how to prepare briefs, on not making mistakes. It's like spend the time doing the research so you don't make mistakes instead of having to spend the time afterwards cleaning up the mess you made. So it's all these things. And we were exposed to so many different things by the CNSC. You have to remember in Port Hope, we weren't fighting one issue. We were fighting contamination in schools. We were fighting the slightly enriched uranium. There was the waste cleanup in town. There was Zerkatech. Like, it was nonstop for the first 5 years that I was involved in this. So we developed ways of beating them. And we're
That's
not and we're not the most pleasant people to deal with when you're screwing us around. I don't make any bones about it, and I don't make any apologies for it.
as you
If you're
shouldn't.
gonna,
And that's the thing, like in a healthy democracy, the citizens should be able to do that and not be mistreated. So I appreciate what you're saying. I was wondering if you wanted to talk a little bit about Alberta and the Peace River. Speaking of dangerous language they use by trying to minimize, I really don't like the term small modular reactors that they are trying to put out when they're really just saying nuclear power. Try to downplay it being nuclear power. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about this nuclear power that they want to put in Peace River and what your advice to some of us would be about that.
okay, that's what I was going to cover next. But I've had one comment about Elliott Lake. That's probably the best comment I heard, and it was from a native elder, and it was probably 25 years ago. He says, he says, 100 years ago they wanted fur, so they came and took all the animals. He
Yeah.
says, 50 years ago they wanted timber, so they came and took all the trees. Now they want uranium, they're coming back for the goddamn rocks. And you can understand how that community feels. Like they were
Oh, yeah.
in the middle of all of it, all the way through.
Yep.
In a lot of cases, these communities don't know what we know to be able to fight back.
Hmm.
So that's why I came out to Alberta first week of May, because people don't understand how to take these people on, and
Hmm.
they don't understand the technology, they don't understand the process. So I'll just run through the process of it in two stages. The the project was first proposed in 2007 by a company called Energy Alberta out of Calgary, and they were basically hucksters, snake oil salesmen. They were
As
caught
they
lying.
all are from Alberta and Calgary. Who said that? Just kidding.
Yeah, you're trying to throw your voice to me, eh?
Yeah. Go
So they were
ahead.
ca- they,
Yeah.
they were caught lying right off the bat about purchasing land for the reactors and having power contracts for the reactors, and it was the newspapers that caught them lying. And at first, they were only going to build 2 reactors, and that's what they told everybody. But when they filed their application with the CNSC, it was for 4 reactors. So their reputation went in the toilet, and they had to sell the project to Bruce Power. Uh, Energy Alberta bought the company back from Bruce Power a couple of years ago, and they're the ones that initiated this project again. The other company that's involved in building the reactors is SNC Lavalin, the one of the most corrupt companies on earth this century. They've been nailed for bribery, fraud, conspiracy in Canada, Bangladesh, Libya, Cambodia. They're just nasty, nasty people. Now, they couldn't come to Alberta to initiate this project because of their close ties to Justin Trudeau, because he was the one that went to bat for them, that ended up getting Jody Raybould fired. That was so they couldn't come out to Alberta and put the project forward themselves. So that's why they brought Energy Alberta back in again to be the puppet out front of the whole project. So that was announced in March of 2014. In April of this year, April 14th, actually, Energy Alberta filed their application to build the reactors. Now, when they filed that application, it automatically triggers a 30-day comment period that people have to comment on the reactors. It just happened that that period was right in the middle of spring planting up in this area up here when nobody has time because it's all farming. There's nothing else up here but farming. And none of the farmers would have been able to get to it. The second part of that is that once that comment period was triggered, then the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada and the CNSC became co-authorities, and their mandate was to inform the community about the project and to inform the community that they had the right to comment on the project. When I got out, that was supposed to be the middle of April. When I got here the first week of May, nobody knew anything about the comment period, and very few people even knew about the nuclear reactors. And we essentially subsequently found out by talking to literally hundreds of people that they had not informed anybody in the community whatsoever,
Mm-hmm.
not a bit. So when they get the comments sent in, they go into a registry on the Impact Assessment Agency's website, and it's basically a vote on whether they want nuclear or not. So what they were doing was purposely suppressing the vote from the rural areas because they know farmers out here don't want anything to do with it. So we had to come up with something to counteract that. We didn't find out until we had confirmation on June 23rd at a public meeting. And once we had confirmation, then I had private meetings with the Impact Assessment Agency and the CNSC and read them the Riot Act in no uncertain terms. So they knew
And on
that,
behalf of all Albertans, thank you, and especially the farmers from Peace, thank you.
yeah, like nobody was aware of it. They were not aware of the process. They didn't even know it was actually a vote, and they didn't know they had a right to vote on it.
Right.
So once I went at them in that meeting, then within 2 days, the Impact Assessment Agency had radio ads on the radio, and that was the first time in 11 weeks talking about the comment period. The second thing that happened 10 days later was that they referred the whole project to an environmental assessment under an independent full panel review, the highest level of scrutiny that you can give a project. Now, they hadn't planned on referring it until November, but they did it in July for the simple reason that they wanted the CNSC and Impact Assessment Agency wanted to take themselves out of the line of fire
Mm.
because we caught them with their pants down over letting the community know.
Yeah.
So what we did was we developed a comment form stating that you're against nuclear, and we got people to sign them. And in the first 3 weeks, we had over 250 signatures that we sent to the Canadian Nuclear or to the Impact Assessment Agency on the 23rd, which was their deadline. And those 250 people changed the number of people that were supporting the project on their registry. Before we put that in, it was 60% of people were against the project. Those 250 names that we put in brought it up to 80% of people that are against the project.
Right on.
So essentially we have control of that. And like I've got another pile of them in front of me here now that we're going to be sending in within 10 days or so.
Right on.
So we know what their process was. They were
Hold on,
given
hold on. You said 10 days from now. So, like, this isn't going to air for 7 days. So, in the meantime, can I put out anything to encourage people to send that to you within the next, like, 10 days?
Yeah, one of the other things that came out of reading them the Riot Act was that they agreed to extend the deadline indefinitely because nobody had known anything about it for the first 3 months. So this is kind of their way of backwatering a little bit. So
Nice.
we had that July 23rd deadline, but it was a soft deadline and we can continue putting in comments. And I told them in my submission to IAC that we're going to continue educating the community right up until the municipal elections in October and cover all the areas that they missed that they were supposed to do.
Right on.
So it's a simple thing that we did. It's a one piece of paper, and it's just all people have to do to help out is to sign that bloody piece of paper, and then we sent a package of 250, and that was more. We did more in 3 weeks than they did in 3 months with all their resources, and we figured they spent $1 million on it. So it cost roughly $2,500 per comment that they got in. We
Wow.
spent less than $1,000 and got the same amount of comments.
Good for you.
And,
This,
and
like
they have
another example of citizen-led initiatives like this, like I cannot thank you enough on behalf of not just like my ancestors from Delaney, as well as Albertans, as well as the folks in your actual area of Peace River there. So, like, I just, it is, well, I think it's unethical for them to behave in this manner in any capacity, and yet they still do it. Gross.
they didn't have any choice up here. When they came through the first time, we went door to door throughout this county. You have to remember there's only 4,000 people in this county, but it's spread out over 20,000 square kilometers. It's huge.
Yeah,
And we went door to door collecting people's signatures, whether they were for it, against it, or needed more information. And
sure.
88% of people were against it. And even with that, it still took us another year at that time to get them to get rid of the project.
Wow.
Okay. Now you have to remember that the decision on the project is made by the CNSC. And the way that they decide on it is that, and we have this in writing, that they will not extend a nuclear license to a company unless it's in a willing host community. Okay. Now, just recently, just a few months ago, Ignace in Northern Ontario voted on whether they were going to have the deep waste repository there. And they voted to have it there by 51 to 49%. So, previous we were at 88%. Right now on IAC site, we're at 80%. And we're trying to get a plebiscite in the county here,
Mhm.
and we'll be pushing the 90% up here. So once we get those two votes, for lack of a better term, in place, then we can force the CNSC to say, take your project, get the hell out of here. We don't care about anything else.
Right on.
And the longer that you're here, the more damage you're doing to people's health. Leave. We don't want it. So we have a different tact. I have no respect for them whatsoever. I don't treat them with any respect because they don't deserve any.
Yeah.
So it's ways that we've found to work the process. And like I do presentations on the technical aspects and I can go toe to toe with their people, but the average person doesn't understand enough about nuclear to have an opinion about it.
Hmm.
They, somebody, they can ask an expert a question, the expert gives the answer, and the person doesn't know whether they're being told the truth or not.
Well, and
So,
here's the thing, especially in Alberta, we seem to like love misinformation, spread it like wildfire, and it's almost always some industry plant that gave that misinformation. So what are kind of things that we should be looking for when the industry puts in their millions of dollars into like, marketing and ads and conversation into this and spreading misinformation that favors them and not the people?
one of the things to watch for right off the bat is when they're just given opinions and roundabout explanations. If they're not given numerical facts, they're probably bullshitting. Okay, and you'll see that with reactors. One of the things right now, it's thorium reactors. It's a different than uranium, and they're claiming that, well, they don't have to use radioactive uranium and there's less waste and they don't need to use as much water. But what they don't tell you is that thorium isn't fissile by itself. The way that they have to start the reaction is to have plutonium in with it to kickstart it. It's like a pump motor, and it's so that's being put out there, but they're using these wonderful phrases, these benign terms
Yep.
to make people go to sleep, but there's no data, there's no numbers. If they're not producing numbers, there's usually little truth to it. One classic example with the nuclear industry, they're always trying to trash solar and wind. And oh, it's got, no impact, no impact. Well, in the year 2000, nuclear reactors supplied 17% of all electricity in the world. Solar and wind supplied 0.2%. In 2023, nuclear only supplied 9% of the total global electricity. Solar and wind supplied 13.7%. That's how fast it's growing.
Right on.
And the reason I'm saying that is that they've got a push on for nuclear in Canada because we have this nuclear legacy longer than any country in the world.
Sure.
We have the lobby, the nuclear lobby is one magnitude greater than the oil and gas lobby just because of how enmeshed it is into our DNA in here. So we can't. I lost my train of thought for a second. Sorry, I
Probably,
just lost.
yeah, we're talking really about the nuclear lobby, and I think a lot about its influence in Ontario and in Ottawa, but we're out here in Alberta, so it's really ironic to me, like we're especially in this ridiculous conversation of separation, that like we will literally need this nuclear watchdog that isn't one at all, and more like an industry plant. To be helping with Alberta to get that nuclear power going. And yet here they're talking about separation. Like it, economically, this doesn't make any sense to me, which maybe leads me to my next question. If you had a chance to sit down with Mark Carney and talk about these issues, like unfortunately, he is like, the former governor for the Bank of Canada as well as the UK, and now, Golden Sachs type guy. Like what in your mind is the economic conversation to have with him about why we should never do this?
The main reason we don't need it. Like Alberta does not need the nuclear power. We don't need the electricity. There was an agreement signed between Alberta and the United States in 2003 for Alberta to supply electricity to the United States. The reason being is that all the tar sands companies, each one of them has their own natural gas cogeneration facility to supply the steam they need for oil recovery. The byproduct is electricity that they hardly use any of. So they had all this excess electricity and they were trying to send that to the States. That's where the whole thing started. So the last time around, they wanted to build the reactors in the peace country so that they could send the power to the States. And it's the same thing this time around. The tar sands has an excess of electricity right now. The reason that they want to locate it here is twofold. One, it's beside the Peace River. The second is it's only 300 kilometers from Site C Dam. So they only have to do a 300-kilometer intertie line to get the power right down to the States. So the economics is twofold. One, they're always talking jobs, 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 but they don't talk impact on the community.
Mm-mm.
Like the town of Peace River, the reactors aren't actually in Peace River. They're in the county that's north of Peace River. It's a town of 7,500 people, and they're estimating over 5,000 people during the construction phase. They can't even supply services to their 7,500 residents now, let alone 5,000 construction workers that drop in with all their baggage.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like there's no financial case to be made for it. The cost of the reactors is just exorbitant. Uh, SNC-Lavalin is claiming $9 billion per reactor, but there's no reactor that's been built this century in North America or Western Europe for less than $19 billion.
Wow.
So they purposely underestimate the cost of building the reactors to get them started and get them going. And they get to the point, the same as they did with Site C, that, oh, we've got $7 billion into this and we're out of money. So now the taxpayers got to finish the project.
Right.
So that's what's going on. So
Yeah.
when they look at the financials, they don't make sense.
Mm-hmm.
None of them make sense. The cost of installing nuclear is like 4 times higher than what the commensurate amount of solar and wind would be. Now, the Alberta government is partially responsible for that, in that in the last 20 years, they put 2 moratoriums on wind power.
Oh,
We're under one right now.
I know.
You know,
We actually had a really good job, and my husband lost it because of all of this political nonsense, actually. And yeah, it's we like because we are what second generation energy, and so you know we all know we have to transition away from fossil fuels. So that's what we were attempting to do, and the Alberta government is, the politics of this is just not hurting just Albertan jobs, but and at the end of the day, the future as well. So,
yeah,
yeah.
like if we're going to pay the price for it somewhere down the line. It's the rest of the world for the last 25 years has voted renewables.
Hmm.
It's like there's only 15 countries in the world that are supporting nuclear.
Yeah. When I ran provincially, like by then, we already had all this data to show that the global changes that were happening when it came to energy policy, knowing that Alberta would be left behind if we didn't start doing transitions. And, obviously, Albertans, they're not educated on these issues. And then they vote for the UCP, who, have smoke and mirrors and lies to give to them. They fall for it, vote these fellows in, and now we're at this point where I just when I look at the cleanup mess alone for the tar sands, let alone all the abandoned wells that we
Well,
have all across the province, let alone now add nuclear to it. Like I can't wrap my head around why it is Albertans are so complacent with putting up with a government that is so hell bent to hurt us.
people just don't understand.
Yeah,
Like the I was up here 15 years ago for 3 years fighting the last project,
sure.
and when you inform people about it, they got involved. They
Yeah,
got mad,
yeah.
and now you can't get anybody off their ass to do anything. It's like I know I'm going to piss people off, but the best thing they could do is load a whole bunch of people on a bus and send them to the land of Oz and see if the wizard can put some courage in them. You know,
Yep, yep, that's about it. Well, I
you
love that you
know,
said that, and I appreciate your honesty. And so I already have talked to you about coming back to the show in a month or so, or whenever you have updates. But in the meantime, if people want to follow you, I've seen that you're on Facebook. Is that really where you'd like our listeners and our followers to kind of start putting their energy and resources and time into?
that and just contact me by email is actually the very best. I live on email
Sure.
because I can deal with so many more people that way.
And what's your
They,
email, Pat?
it's Entwork, Entwork. Ents is in the walking trees and Lord of the Rings, and at hotmail.com. The Facebook group page that we have is the Northern Action Alliance. And there's a lot of information on that site. And until the last week or so, I'd kept it with just information on nuclear. It wasn't a discussion page, but in the last week now, it's become a discussion page. If anybody wants to get in touch that wants to do help, or that wants to help in any way, we'd be more than appreciative to get them involved. Uh, I think I mentioned to you yesterday, I've been in touch, or I sent out packages to all the Métis nations in the province, and I'm going to do the same with all First Nations later today. So, and we have to do a presentation in Paddle Prairie next week. So we're trying to get out to as many groups as possible. People don't have to have a large outlay of time to be involved in this and to help us out. One is just sending in comments to the IAC registry, fill in these forms, or collect signatures. Send your email address to me, and then that way, when we're sending out information, you can spread it around from there. Like it's essentially a very large email chain that we're creating up here because of the difficulty in the logistics of trying to communicate with people that are so widely scattered in that. So
Hmm.
there's ways people can help out without having to do a lot of work, without having to go in public. There's ways to help out, and people have to get off their rear ends and start helping out. It's like it's your children that you've got to start looking after
Yes.
because
Um,
we can't. we're just going to leave a mess for them otherwise.
Well, and arguably we already have. And that's why I think it's important as like, second, third generation of folks after we've started digging up this uranium to be on top of this and to be working towards the waste that needs to be properly disposed of. And the money that we assumed we were going to invest in research and science has never materialized. It's all about private corporations' profits, not about the
Yeah.
safety of the people. So my hope is that people start paying attention to this a little more. I mean, I remember growing up and caring about dismantling nuclear weapons in general. Like Douglas Roach, the retired senator, would talk about those things, but it's like, yeah, but nuclear energy in general. Like we need to be on top of that and paying attention to how it's going to hurt the earth,
Yeah.
not just today, forever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the biggest problem people face learning about nuclear isn't so much the complexity, it's the volume of information, and most of it in the form of infomercials.
Mm,
So, what we're doing is rewriting the material so that we're connecting the dots for people so that they can understand what it is that they should be learning,
hmm
and giving them the tools to start off learning.
hmm
Once they know the basics, then they can go do their own research. But to just go in and blindly try and do research, it's incredibly frustrating
It's a
because there's
lot.
just so much material.
Yeah,
Anybody that needs any help or direction or information, contact me.
I
It's
love
that
that.
simple.
Thank you, Pat. Thank you for coming on the podcast to talk about it and giving me this information so I can start sharing it on the other social medias and other ways to try to encourage and get people to do more because, and, I mean, if you are a first generation settler who's trying to farm, I mean, this matters to you, right?
Yep.
It matters to everybody. It should matter to everybody anyway. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you very much for having me and the opportunity to get the message out to other people and to get them involved in the process. Like, there's no problem beating them. We beat them every time since 2003, but it's just we need some bodies a little bit, just
Hmm.
collecting signatures, no more than that.
Right on.
And we'll kick their ass again. Anyway, take care, Michelle. Thank you very much. Have a
Thank you,
great day.
Pat. I appreciate you. Absolutely wonderful having Pat come. We'll put all that information in the show notes so that way you can access it and follow. Please, I beg of you to not be idle, to follow this and to put it out there on behalf of my ancestors, my relatives, where I originally come from. This matters to me. Obviously, now being in Calgary, Alberta, I see it as my duty to raise awareness to this as well. I want to just say that, ironically enough, our next book club is actually by George Erasmus, and wonderful book, Hota, that I'm excited for us all to read. I want to give a shout out to The Medicine Line by Tony Rees. That's going to be our November book, where we're going to discuss basically the U.S. Canadian borders with the history of that. I want to say Masicho to my ancestors. I'm honored to be here thanks to your survival, to my granny, my mom, of what strength looks like through your example. I want to thank my dad for teaching me to be strong and blunt. My stepmom for showing me what a proud culture is through her Austrian family, teaching me how to be a proud Calgarian. It is through her I am a second generation proud Calgarian. My husband, Darcy, he has produced, edited this show on top of being my husband, childhood friend, father of our child, support down my journey of all of this colonial violence into our child. We are blessed to learn from you daily. We are honored you chose us. You give me daily accountability to be a better and stronger person. I hope my family and will be proud in the future discussing these present day issues. I honor the Blackfoot. The elders, the members have been so kind to me on my Red Road journey. Elder Red Crane taught me how to pronounce my spirit name in Blackfoot. Leonard Kenny taught me how to pronounce my spirit name in Satu Dene. My humblest apologies to the elders and language keepers as I try to learn proper pronunciation. My Patreon account is Native Calgarian, where you can pledge and support. Thank you, previous donors, for showing your support. If you value listening or watching and can afford to give, thank you. For those who cannot afford to give, I would love to hear from you at nativeyyc@gmail.com, where you can send in your comments or questions. I have a YouTube channel. You can go and subscribe. You can go to my link tree and see all sorts of links there. And of course, nativecalgarian.com for the latest podcasts and pin posts on social media. And I do talk a lot about dark things, but my life is filled with joy with my family on a regular basis. And yeah, I just wanted to share. It was my dad, out of all people, who originally listened to Katie Lang in my family. And when he was in his Zydeco buckwheat bluegrass era, and anyway, for my daughter's birthday, got her an album. And it's so funny because my dad is a lot of isms, and he is unfortunately very homophobic. But I thought it was really wonderful to have my dad, who just loves music, give my child someone I look up to so much for her activism for gay rights, Katie Lang, and you know, living through that whole when she was it was okay. She was a lesbian in Alberta, kinda. But when she was a vegan, they took down the name in Consort, Alberta. I remember that. So I've told my daughter that story all through her childhood, and she finally has now a Katie Lang album that one of the guys who probably personally would have taken down that sign gave her. So it cracks me up, and it feels good to know that he's trying, even though he doesn't understand. So, anyway, I hope you feel good about that story because I know I do. Anyway, I give side eye to those Calgary rabbits. You're lucky I'm not tradish. And my beautiful cousin would say, or you'd be in my dish. Thank you, folks, for listening. I appreciate you.